Welcome. Today's program is Florida Friendly Landscaping Program, Water in the Landscapes. This is part of our crash course series, and this is actually the third program in this year's crash course series. The third of fourth, we do them quarterly. How many of you have attended some of the previous crash course programs that we have done? Feel free to put those in the chat box to say if you've attended or not. Yeah, we got one. Yeah. The first one, well, thank you for coming. So the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program, it is a 9-principle program. We'll talk a little bit about it. And each one of these during these quarterly sessions, we kind of dive a little bit deeper in some of the principles. So we'll introduce the entire Florida Friendly program, but then we'll dive into a little bit deeper areas, discussion. Previous programs had to do with attracting wildlife, right plant, right place. And today's program is going to be talking a lot about water, or water in the landscapes. So when you think about water in the landscapes, what's some of the things that you think of? Feel free to put that in the chat box. Koi pond, yes. Koi ponds are great features within a landscape. Fountains, yep. Collecting rainwater, that's a really good one. Bird baths, rain chains, basins, living lakeside, excellent. Rivers, other water bodies. Mosquitoes, that's very good. That's very true. Mosquitoes can be problematic in some of those really wet areas. Ponds, bird bath fountains, rain barrels and rain gardens. Man, I think you all are covering everything already. Irrigation, that's great. So we'll talk a little bit about all of this today. So that's why I was like, we have a lot of content. When I was putting the PowerPoint together, I was like, got a lot to cover, but I think we'll do really well. So feel free to send in any of the questions that you have along the way, and both Cindy and Mark will be able to help out. So by the end of the program today, I want you to be able to answer these 3 questions, these 3 big questions. What is the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program? And why is water important in my landscape? And how can I use water better in my landscape? Not only like why we can use it, but how can we use it efficiently and effectively? So we'll go ahead and jump on in. So let's talk about Florida, because when we're talking about the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program, you know, there's a reason the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program exists. And I always like to show this slide at each one of the presentations that we have. So this picture that you see in this image is the state of Florida. The dark green colors, or that green colors, that is like conservation land, public parks, state parks, national parks, etc. And the red area, that's a land use that we call like developed land. So that's residential areas, urban areas, commercial, anything like that. That doesn't include like farms and agriculture or anything, but that developed area. But what you're looking at, this is the development pattern of Florida in 2005. So we did the university did a study called the Florida 2060 plan, and they update it every 10 years or so. But this is from the Florida 2060 plan, and it looked at the current development trends and how Florida is supposed to develop over the next 30, 40 years. And this is 2005, and there's about 15 million people in the state at this period. And we're having about 1,000 people move to the state each day. And we're expected that by 2060, our population is going to double. And when we actually look at our numbers, we're actually getting to that trajectory sooner than 2060 than originally planned. But if we consider our current development practices, or how we're developing neighborhoods, communities, etc., roadways, we know that Florida is going to develop and it's going to grow. So based off of that projection of population growth, there's some other things that we look at, but then we can start to see what that development land pattern is going to look like in 2060. And by looking at this, we can see that there's going to be quite an urbanization effect throughout the state. And, you know, this is from that original plan. This changes, like I said, every 10 years. Because of the new turnpikes that are proposed, that development pattern can change because there's going to be a new corridor going through that Nature Coast area. But anyways, we can see that with that development change, this is what we're expected to look like and have a developed area by 2060 with that doubling population. So some of the things that we start to think about is an increased population. We're doubling the population, so we can expect that there's going to be a doubled amount of water use, as well as an increase in non-point source pollutants or pollution that ends up in our waterways that can be associated with some of our different types of land uses, like our developed areas and our yards, our landscapes. So this is important to think about, because if we want to preserve the integrity of the state of Florida, both economically, environmentally, and culturally, we have to think, what can we do now to make sure that we're not doubling the impacts that we currently exist with the expected doubling of the population? So that's where the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program comes in. And here's some of the information that we just talked about. You know, and one of the biggest points is that decreased habitats that filter polluted runoff. So conservation area, wooded areas, as we lose those, we lose that ecosystem service that helps purify and clean water before it ends up in back into the environment. So, but one of the other big important things about it is when we're talking about water use, approximately 60% of homeowner water use in Florida is from the lawn and landscape irrigation. That's a lot of water, 60% on average. So some homeowners will be a little bit higher, some will be lower, but approximately 60%. That's a lot. So if we can think, okay, if I have the ability to reduce that water use within a landscape, I should be able to reduce the concerns and threats related to water quantity, like how much water do we have, as well as water quality, because we have our blue-green algae blooms that happen within our fresh water bodies. And like you can see on the image on the right, that's just an example. And a lot of that is associated with non-point source pollutants, which can be linked to things like septic tanks, as well as water use, or sorry, our landscapes and how we're managing our urban areas. So like fertilizer use, pesticide use, etc. So that's why we have the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program, is we're thinking of what are those strategies or what are those ways that we can have like an approach to maintain an attractive, colorful, and diverse yard. It's friendly to wildlife, it's environmentally responsible, less work than a traditional landscape, kinda, it depends on how you end up managing it. But the ultimate goals come back to conserving water and protecting water quality. And we also can tie in enhancing or helping attract wildlife and help with wildlife biodiversity. But water is the crux of the entire program. So water quantity and quality. So to help achieve those goals, we have 9 principles. The 9 principles of the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program. These are the most important parts of this entire program because it helps us just creates a clear roadmap for us to move forward. So those 9 principles, the first one is right plant, right place. Right plant, right place, that's the big umbrella term. The first principle, if you follow right plant, right place, all the other principles start to fall in line. Right plant, right place is essentially you're taking plants and you're planting them in the environment in which they can thrive. So a plant that likes full sun, you put it in full sun in the landscape, or a plant that likes deep shade, you're putting it in deep shade, as well as you're thinking about its water needs, as well as, you know, if it has any resistance to pesticides, its soil conditions that it likes, or not resistant to pesticides, resistance to different pest problems. So you take these plants and you put those in those environmental conditions that they thrive in naturally, and all of a sudden you're going to have a very resilient, strong, healthy landscape. And by following that right plant, right place, it allows you to get to that second principle, which is water efficiently. It allows you to fertilize appropriately. Allows to, by mulching, that's been one of the strategies, attracting wildlife. you can manage yard pest. 7 is that recycle. 8 is reduce stormwater runoff, and 9 is protect the waterfront. So with those 9 principles, that first step, right plant, right place, makes everything else possible. So as part of this crash course series, I don't necessarily want to go over every single principle that we have listed here, but I want us to just today, talking about the water in the landscapes, I want us to highlight a certain few. I want us to talk about watering efficiently. I want us to talk about mulching appropriately, reducing stormwater runoff, as well as protecting the waterfront. So usually I work in like moving forward, but today I'm going to start from the bottom and work our way up. I want to talk about protecting the waterfront first. I like to ask people, commonly, I like to ask people, where do you live? So go ahead in the chat box and tell me, where do you live? Not necessarily, I don't want your address, your specific address. I don't want that. But just if you're meeting a stranger and you're kind of telling them where you live, what do you tell them? I like one, in a forest. That's great. Kanapaha area, East Gainesville, downtown Gainesville, yeah. Blues Creek and backyard, New Merrill Hopper, Bivens Arm Lake. Wonderful. St. Augustine, Lake City. Wonderful. Swamp, I like that one. Sand Hills. That's great. So that's wonderful. You all are doing you all are giving me some good responses. So a lot of the times when we talk to people, when you ask, like, where do you live? A lot of these are, let's say, geographical locations, or they're geopolitical boundaries. That's the word I want to use. So we're using boundaries that we have created. Gainesville, it's a municipal boundary. East Gainesville, it's a region within Gainesville, or a part of Gainesville. There's neighborhoods that were put in here. One person wrote the Shire. I wish that would be really nice. But Bivens Arm Lake, I do like that one because that's actually related to a water body. Downtown, that's a specific area. So one of the things I really like to ask people that is, when I say, where do you live, I want us to kind of think a little bit differently. You know, we think about those geopolitical boundaries that we've created in some type of way to designate landscapes, but I want us to think about our environmental boundaries. Where do we live within the environment? So one of the things I always like to use as that is, I talk about watersheds. We could talk about different water bodies. Excuse me. So if we start thinking about where do we live within the environment, it allows us to have a better context in how our behaviors impact our landscapes and our environments that we live in. So I want us to go ahead and we'll dive deeper into this and that protecting the waterfront principle. So protect the waterfront. In the state of Florida, we have 10,000 miles of river. We have 7,800 lakes, over 700 different springs, 1,350 miles of coastline. We are second in the country with length of coastline. Do you all know who was first? That's just a general trivia question, I guess. Oh, yeah, Nancy got it right off the bat. Alaska. Yep, Alaska, us, and then California is the third. But Alaska's right. So we have 1,350 miles of coastline. But you know what else is important to think about is not all of us live directly on a water body. I don't have a creek in my backyard. I don't have a spring in my backyard. I live just in a neighborhood. Everything around me is a different home, but it's important to think about that 100% of Florida interacts with water. No matter where you're at, no matter where you live in the state, I mean anywhere, not just Florida, but you interact with water, especially so in Florida, because I mean even our water table can literally just be inches below our feet depending on where we're at. So it's important to know that wherever we're at, we have an impact and we interact with water. Whether you're in hail plantation here in Gainesville, or if you're living out in the woods or in the bayou, you are directly related, directly connected to the water in Florida. So that's why I like to talk about watersheds. Watersheds is a great way for us to kind of use natural geography to kind of define where we are at. So it's easy to see watersheds within mountainous regions with a lot of topography, but a watershed is simply defined as essentially like a big funnel where all the water lands in that funnel. It all flows down towards a specific location, whether it be a lake, into another stream, a pond, or it can, in parts of Florida, it might be a sink where it goes straight down into the aquifer, or it could go out into the ocean. I mean, a great example is the Mississippi River. If we look at the watershed of the Mississippi River, it's ginormous, but it's also broken down into smaller watersheds. But we all live within a watershed. So no matter where you live, your water has to flow somewhere. And wherever it flows, that's that watershed that you're in. So how many of you, like, one person wrote that their property backs up to Hogtown Creek. So they are in what we call the Hogtown Creek watershed. Any of you know what watershed that you live in?
Hogtown Creek?
No idea. Blues Creek watershed? Yep. Nope. Nope. So I am at the end, I'm going to pull up a map. I just have to remember, y'all have to remind me. We have a map that's with, at least the city of Gainesville has put together, where you can see all the little watersheds within the area. So Paynes Prairie, so that more than likely you're in the Sweetwater Branch watershed. So Sweetwater Branch, all that water that comes from like the east side of Gainesville and up north towards, I think you get up towards around 23rd and south is all Sweetwater Branch, and it heads down right into Paynes Prairie. So knowing which watershed you live in can actually have a big impact that, you know, if something lands on my road or lands in my yard, this is where that water is going to flow. So, you know, like if you, some of the big ones in this, in Gainesville at least, is you're going to be in the Sweetwater Branch. You're going to be in Alachua watershed, which is the far east side of the county, or you're going to be on the Hogtown Creek watershed, which goes into Hyacinth. I believe it's Hyacinth, which is out towards the west side of Gainesville. But then we get one of the unique things about Florida that not all other areas have is we have a spring shed area. So a big portion of the west side of the county and northwest side of the county, you're primarily in a big recharge zone for the aquifer. So rather than the water flowing like directly into the Santa Fe River, your water is going to, most of it's going to infiltrate down and recharge the aquifer. So that's what we call a spring recharge area or spring shed. So they're very similar, but just where your water is going. But it's important that we can learn about where we live, like which watershed that we live in. But going back, why is this important? So when we think about water and when we think about all the impacts that we can have on water or how we relate with water, we need to consider the environmental implications. There's the stormwater runoff. So anything that ends up within our waterway, so oils are in our storm system, so our roadways, our sidewalks, driveways, anything that's within our landscape and water carries it out of the landscape, stormwater runoff. And that can be pollutants, it can be trash, it can be pollutants like your nitrogen or phosphorus that's associated with fertilizers. But we can also then have habitat loss. So with some of the issues that we can have with that habitat loss, invasive species come in. So that image on the bottom, anybody know what that is? What plant that is? It's one of our aquatic invasives. Close. I assume you know, Mark. Feel free to put it. There it is. Water hyacinth. Yeah. So I actually think water hyacinth creates a really cool flower, but it is wildly invasive. Very, very invasive. So you can end up having habitat loss when we're not managing or treating water properly, as well as you have degrading water quality, which can lead to like algae blooms, etc. But not just environmental issues, we also have economic. It's incredibly expensive to clean water. So the dirtier our water gets or more polluted our water gets, then what's going to happen is it's just going to cost more for municipalities to clean it. And it's already expensive as it is. So the worse it gets, the higher that cost gets. It's also important to think about how clean water is important for the state with regards to tourism, agriculture, and hunting. So tourism is obviously one of the biggest economic drivers for our entire state. Now imagine tourism without clean water. And that's not just like Disney, you know, or Orlando area, but think about our springs. If the springs aren't clean, think about if our beaches, the water at our beaches was not clean. Think about just fishing. You know, I wish I had the number with me, but fishing in the state of Florida, just for sport, is a huge economic driver, and that is dependent on clean water, as well as hunting. Hunting is impacted by clean water because you're screwing up the environment essentially. So you're reducing the biodiversity as well as the resilience and population. As well as you have an impacts on public health. So public health, I mean, it's this gross water is not healthy for us. So, you know, not only are we looking at from the environmental perspective, the economics perspective, but there is a huge public health and a public safety perspective. Nasty water smells horrible. And also there are times where it can just being in contact with it can make you sick. And in some very rare cases, it can easily lead to death. So that's why we talk about different shoreline protection strategies. Beyond just what can we do within our landscape to protect the waterfront, but there are some shoreline strategies. So we have buffer zones. We refer to this as the ring of responsibility. So if you are on a 10-foot, if you're on a water body, we want people that that you don't mow, fertilize, apply pesticides within 10 feet of a water body. We kind of want that to be a no maintenance zone because that keeps like clippings and grass out of the water. It allows for, as nutrients or anything flows towards the water, those plants can intercept it. So that buffer zone is a great way to help just protect the water quality because you're allowing those plants to intercept any pollutants or runoff that might occur. As well as we want to talk about stormwater management. So we have those buffer zones, but stormwater management, thinking about like, where is our stormwater going? So when we talk about water quality and quantity, sometimes we concern ourselves with how much water we're using, as well as the water quality with regards to like fertilizers that might end up running out into the water bodies or that's misapplied. But we also have to think about stormwater. So anytime we create impervious surfaces, such as sidewalks, roadways, water has the inability to naturally infiltrate into the soil like it always has. So it flows into our stormwater systems. And what it does is that's a lot of excess water that's now within our riverways or water bodies. And that can actually lead to additional, not only pollution, but it can have an impact on that river quality because it can be more increased flooding. It can end up ends up channelizing streams because you have an excess amount of water. And when I say channelizing, rather than that natural curve of a stream, a slow moving stream, when you have a lot of water comes through, it starts to straighten that stream. And that leads to additional flooding, stream bank failure, etc. And that's just all associated with stormwater management or mismanagement. So when we think about shoreline protection, what's happening with our stormwater? Are we using it in different ways? And then last one is erosion control. Who knows where this picture is taken? Anybody?
Devil's Mill Hopper, isn't it?
Yeah, that's Devil's Mill Hopper. So that's the most outdoor stairs you'll probably walk in Florida. So yeah, it's the old trail. Yeah, that's true because they had to rebuild it. So that's the old one. But erosion control. So, you know, we don't really have a bunch of steep banks or anything like that in Florida because it's pretty steep, but flat. But we have like our sinkholes and we have our streamways. And plant material is a great way to help stabilize banks. It helps prevent erosion. Trees have the ability to prevent erosion. They have the ability to help protect the soil, the plant material, as well as they can help enhance property values if they're maintained properly. So erosion control, that's one of the biggest things, another one of the big things that we can do to help protect our water bodies, whether it's on a river, a beach, or in some cases like a spring shed or a spring or like a sinkhole, because water goes down into Devil's Mill Hopper and goes right into the aquifer. So let's talk a little bit about maintenance with regards to the 9th principle. And some of these maintenance practices, there are ways that we can make sure that we're protecting the waterfront a little bit more, a little bit better. So some of these include fertilizing responsibly, watering efficiently, managing pests appropriately, as well as just adhering to some other waterfront restrictions. So we're not going to get into all of those maintenance types because they're things that we've covered in the past as part of this crash course. But always feel free to reach out to us if you want more information about fertilizing responsibly and managing pests. So, but let's talk about some of the shoreline maintenance, like best management practices. So always think about how can you keep rain and irrigation water on site to prevent runoff from occurring. So if we can keep as much water on our property and allow it naturally just infiltrate in the soil where it can get cleaned, it's a great way that it can help protect our water bodies. Use porous surfaces for walkways, patios, and driveways. One that I really like is getting crushed shells or limestone that's really small. Sometimes we refer to them as crushed refines, but those are great bases for walkways, patios, and driveways, and allows water to infiltrate. The only issue is with those, since they're made of limestone, they break down and they increase soil pH. So areas right around where you plant those, you might not be able to put acidic loving plants like azaleas. But there's other ways you can use porous surfaces, like different pavers that allow for water to infiltrate into the ground. So the sky's the limit. But you can use berms and swales and terracing to help slow the movement of water. Helps add interest to a landscape as well. But lastly is direct downspouts towards the landscape beds or the lawn. Don't put them out on the roadway. Putting them on the roadway, all that water that comes off your roof, down your downspout, if it goes down your driveway right into the road, that's a huge contributor to a lot of the stormwater issues that we are having with pollution, as well as just the excess of water that can lead to flooding and additional stream failures. So even though you're not necessarily seeing that water go right into the stream, it goes into that stormwater management system and then out towards the water, out into a stream or a creek. So that fertilizing responsibly, always obtain a soil test before fertilizing. Follow the printed directions carefully. The label is the law. Do not apply fertilizer or pesticide before any rainfall, because any of those excess nutrients that you apply, or if you misapply them, or if it rains, runs off into waterways, or it can leach excessively into the ground. We need to apply just enough where it's effective for the plants, but not enough where it ends up being a major pollutant. Some of our other shoreline maintenance BMPs is use broadcast spreaders equipped with a deflector shield. If you're going to be using a fertilizing spreader like this, we have deflector shields that are actually required for a lot of people to use that prohibit that you can put up, which is like a little lever on your spreader, and it prevents it from going in the waterways. It prevents it from spreading onto sidewalks and roadways. But also it's important to know that it's illegal to allow grass clippings and yard waste to enter water bodies, because the grass clippings, even though it's just grass, it breaks down and it provides a lot of nutrients to the water that can lead to those algae blooms. So let's go ahead and jump into principle number 8, which is reduce stormwater runoff. So we define this pretty much as an excess of water, irrigation, rain, or other sources where water might end up being considered as stormwater. So what are some of the things that you can think of when you're thinking of how can I reduce stormwater in my landscape? What's one of the ideas that you have? Feel free to put that in the chat box. Rain barrels, wonderful. Rain barrels are great. Yeah, we got a couple responses for rain barrels. Rain garden. Rain gardens and rain barrels, wonderful. So yeah, rain gardens and rain barrels are wonderful ways that we can think about reducing stormwater. Swales, yes. Lots of plants to suck up the water. That's a good one. Yeah, so plants have the ability. I mean, plants, that's going to be your #1 defense for any of this. They just suck it right up. And reducing those impervious surfaces as much as possible. So y'all are doing really well with this. So let's go ahead and let's talk about, the different types of pollution and these different strategies associated with stormwater runoff. Here we go. So types of pollution. So there's 2 types. There's point source pollution. So that's essentially any pollutant that we can trace to a single point. So a great example, as part of point source pollution, there's it's called the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System Survey, NPDES. It's part of the original Clean Water Act. And anybody that has effluent that they put out into a waterway, it's being monitored and it's being tracked. So a great example is wastewater treatment plants. Any of the water that comes out of any pipes, that has to be monitored. Or like there's a paper mill that's on the St. Johns River. It's point source pollution because they have a pipe where anything that comes out of that building, that plant, they know exactly that it's coming from that plant. So that's actually a little easier to essentially manage because we know the source. We know the sources and things can be done to improve that water quality or to monitor the sources. Non-point source pollution, that's harder because we can't necessarily say, essentially, you can't say it's your fault. That's the easiest way to put it, is it's pollutants that originate from many, many, many different places. So when we talk about the algae growth or algal blooms that occur within our freshwater bodies, nitrogen and phosphorus, they are the biggest contributors to that pollution, those algal blooms. But the thing is, that can come from urban settings, like landscapes that are mismanaged. It can come from agriculture. It can come from septic tanks. It can come from vehicles and oils, and so it comes from everything. So I don't like when people point their fingers and say, oh, it's ag's fault, or no, it's the landscape management's fault. It's everyone's responsibility. We're equally as guilty, and we're equally as responsible to make sure that we do our best to reduce our inputs. Because non-point source pollution, we can't necessarily say a single person is responsible, but we all need to do things to reduce it because that is the hardest one for us to manage. So non-point source pollution is pretty much the biggest thing that we talk about with regards to Florida-friendly landscaping program. And we talk about stormwater, it's important because, you know, there used to be, it's not the case anymore, it used to be the thought that all stormwater enters the storm drain, gets treated. No, it's never been that way. It's never been the case. That water that enters the storm drain goes into the storm sewer and right out into a water body. So anything that lands in your driveway, your roadway, it runs off of your landscape. If it ends up in that storm system, it's going all the way down to the water. A great example that I really like to talk about that I've done with a lot of volunteers and other people as part of classes is the Sweetwater branch here in Alachua County. We did a watershed tour where we start up at the, we start actually down at Sweetwater Branch Preserve, the wetlands park, right where it abuts up to Payne's Prairie, and then we work our way upwards or up the watershed so we can see how land use changes along the way. But anyways, when you're down at the Sweetwater Wetlands Park, they have a giant trash trap and a settling basin. There's multiple settling basins. They'll clean the water before it goes into Payne's Prairie. But what happens is you just see when you're down at the Sweetwater Wetlands branch, if you go out towards, or the wetlands park, where you see where the water all comes in, you can get up kind of close to it. You can see all the garbage that's collected. I've talked to them before. They found washers, dryers, they found couches, and then all sorts of just garbage and trash. And they have to go out and they have to clean it regularly because that's stuff that just ends up in the stormwater system and ends up coming down into towards Payne's Prairie. And luckily we now intercept that before it gets out there. But you know, that's just those big pieces of trash that's easy to see. That doesn't include the oils, the nutrients, or all the other non-point source pollutants that just mixes in with the water. So I want to share this video with you. Let me go ahead and open it. Hold on, you probably hear it, but you can't see it. I like sharing this. This is a fun one. All right, can you all see the screen? All right. So that's, you all saw that fine, I assume? Okay, good. I like showing that video because it kind of paints the picture a little clearer. Now I got to get all my settings all fixed again. Mark, do you see?
Gray boxes.
Okay. And we're good now?
Just, yep, now you're good.
All right. So now let me go back to where we were. That transition is really nice going back and forth between the videos and this. I couldn't embed it. But anyways, when we think about, you know, water quality and all the things that can flow off our roadways and impervious surfaces out in the stormwater system, the biggest thing is here to help prevent these big issues. Now, water quality is always a concern. Just because we don't see the algae blooms does not mean that our water bodies aren't impaired. This just is the big indicator saying there's a serious issue that needs to be fixed now. And that's why it's important for all of us to make sure that we're doing something to help protect the environmental and economic and as well as the health, the social welfare of Floridians. So anyways, so let's talk about how in our landscape we have the ability to reduce or minimize and prevent runoff. So some of these strategies we're going to talk through, some of them you've probably seen before, but the biggest one is keep water in the landscape. how can we keep it in our landscape, preventing it from just flowing out in the road when the stormway anyway. So I mean, the picture on the left, that's such an easy strategy. Is you have a gutter and you have one of the deflector shields that just throws it out into the landscape, and it has plenty of space to just move and then percolate and infiltrate into the soil. But some of our big areas that we have that contribute are those impervious driveways. You know, they're poured concrete or asphalt. All new development pretty much comes with concrete. But if you ever have the opportunity or you have the ability to ever do something like you see on the image on the right, those are pavers that are made to be like a driveway. It's more expensive, more costly, but it allows water to infiltrate into the soil to limit runoff. Those aren't 100% effective, but they are much better than typical concrete. Let's talk about utilizing that water in the landscape. So, you know, one of the strategies that we can use to help prevent the stormwater runoff and be able to utilize it in the landscape, those benefits of plants. And Mark mentioned earlier that plants are a great way to kind of just suck up the water. I mean, plants are going to be your best option overall in some capacity. They can help capture and filter stormwater. They slow the speed of water movement. Turf grass is actually the plant that slows down water the most because of its plant density, but all plants have the ability to slow down water and keep it from moving too quickly. It gives water enough time to start infiltrating into the soil. It can reduce erosion by holding that soil in really good conditions. It can help insulate the soil, provide habitat, food, and cover for wildlife, and as well as those plants can uptake some of those nutrients. So some nutrients that end up in your water or in your landscape, those plants can uptake them. So, I mean, one great example is a lot of us use reclaimed water. That reclaimed water, albeit it's a low amount, but there's nitrogen that's within that water that we apply. So your plants can uptake those nutrients that's within that reclaimed water if you're using reclaimed. And if you did not have anything there, if it ends up on the if you're using reclaimed water and any of that water ends up in your storm drain, that's taking pollutants directly into the water. It's a small amount, but it adds up very quickly. So some ways that I always talk about how we're using water in the landscape beyond the plants, I always use the strategy where I say is the catch, convey, and infiltrate or store. So this catch, you know, we mentioned rain barrels, or some people mentioned rain barrels earlier. I really like rain barrels. And, you know, if you want to buy a rain barrel, the Master Gardener Volunteers, they do sell rain barrels as part of their fundraising activities. So always feel free to reach out to us. Our Master Gardeners build them from repurposed items. Essentially pickle barrels, but we can get those to you if need be. But anyways, so we have rain barrels and they work well, but are they going to be the most effective in using water? Not really, because one rain barrel is only 55 gallons of water. It's still water that you can reuse, but if any of you have rain barrels, if you empty it, one storm comes in and you pretty much fill that sucker up if you're collecting it from any part of your roof in a matter of seconds. But rain barrels, they're still very effective. Some people will put multiple of them together and make them like a series where one overflows to the other. So then they have like, I've seen one time 6 rain barrels kind of built in a big pyramid that they all fill up one another, that a homeowner is able to pull from. But we have bigger alternatives. If you're looking for something that you want to run your entire irrigation system, you want to collect every single ounce of water that lands on your roof, you can always use cisterns, above ground or below ground. In Florida, typically our above ground cisterns are going to be the best, just because of water table, but we do have in some areas below ground cisterns. If you're ever down in Sarasota County, right, Yeah, Sarasota County, their extension office, they have a massive underground cistern at their extension office that irrigates a huge garden of theirs that they're able to just collect off of the roof. But cisterns, you know, you can get something for your home that you can install and collect the water from your rooftop. And it's not a 55 gallon. You can get them upwards of 15,000 gallons if you wanted plus. They can get really, really large, and you can make them look really nice too. So let's talk about then convey. So we can catch the water, but say your system overflows or you need to move water across the landscape. I really like the bioswales, or swales is what they're also called. Dry creek beds is another way. But essentially what you're doing is you're creating an area where you can move water across a landscape if needed to a designated space. So the convey is that movement. And you can have a lot of fun designing bioswales. It can literally be one that some already exist on properties when they're building your home, when they're doing the grading and drainage. They're always going to move water away from the home based off of how they grade it. So there's always actually going to be a natural swale that exists. It's just going to be so shallow you probably can't even see it. But you can always manipulate that or use that to your advantage, that your stormwater goes there. You can put plants there to help infiltrate it, or you can kind of move it to another location. And that's where you can get kind of to an infiltration, or that, you know, we had that catch, down the convey, and then you can get to the infiltration. And that's where you get something like a rain garden. This is an image from actually a homeowner here in Gainesville, and this was shortly after the installation, but they catch all their storm water off of their roof, and they take it through dry creek beds, and then what you see in this image is a big rain garden. It's one of many rain gardens. This is the first one that all the water comes to, and it slowly infiltrates into that soil. And if a lot of water comes out, it has an area that it spills over into another little bioswale dry creek bed, and it links up to another rain garden. And essentially they have no stormwater runoff from their property. They're able to capture and use every single part of it. And essentially once you get back towards the back of their home, you're standing in their garden and no more water is making its way to you because of their ability to capture and control it very effectively. So rain gardens are really, really nice. You know, if you're up north and you build rain gardens and you have more clays or silts in the soil, that water is going to sit in that rain garden for a little bit longer. But because of our sandier soils, these low areas that are just naturally in your yard, or you can shape one yourself, these low areas are going to just primarily be sand, so that water will get in there and then it'll infiltrate very quickly into the soil. Even when it reaches a point where it can no longer absorb water because of that sandy soils, that period in which it can absorb water is very short, and it'll still infiltrate very, very quickly. But let's talk about using stormwater as irrigation. I did the math for us already, so we didn't have to do it. But I wanted to talk about like how effective a cistern can be. So a cistern, 1,500 square feet. Think about a home, you know, and say your rooftop is 1,500 square feet. You know, most homes are going to be between 15 and 2,000, some more, some less, but just right in the middle of the road, 1,500 square feet. Florida averages 54 inches of rain a year. That is 50,463 potential gallons of water that lands on your roof, not to be used in veggie gardens. But I put a little asterisk next to that because we did a study a few years ago. We compared a Florida-friendly landscape to what we call a traditional Florida landscape. Overall, over the course of 2 years with the Florida-friendly landscape, just following our best management practice recommendations, that landscape used only 40,000 gallons of water versus the traditional Florida landscape, which is over 100,000. And that's a 2-year period. So 1 year's worth of rainfall is 2 years worth of a Florida-friendly landscape water's needs, and that included turf grass area as well as ornamental plant beds. So you can see that the capacity to catch water off of a rooftop is huge. You know, that doesn't take into consideration a factor that like our dry season during the winter, and most of our water is falling during the wet season, but still looking at that as a potential of being able to irrigate and manage your entire landscape just from a cistern, it's just phenomenal. So our new extension office that's going to be built in Newberry, we're going to put a giant cistern on it, and it's going to be able to hold enough water from the roof and irrigate entire landscapes. And more than likely we'll never have to touch any water except for times of drought. But anyways, so cisterns can be great ways to capture stormwater and use it in irrigation, because then you're capturing and holding it, and then you're irrigating your landscape just when the plants need it. So it just becomes a great storage area, and then you allow that water to get used and infiltrate into the soil. So now let's jump into the water efficiently, the principle number 2. You know, going back to that number that we gave earlier, oh, we had one of the things that popped up. Thank you, Mark. Yes, there is a concern with water. The reason we talked about water not to be used on veggie gardens is because if you have a galvanized metal roof, aluminum roof, or asphalt shingle tile roof, that water can pick up some of the tar or some of the other materials that's used in that roofing material, and you don't want it to get it on your food as a source of contamination. Landscape, 100% fine. Food crops, no. If you, we don't recommend it. If you end up having to do it or you are using it, clean like crazy and make sure you're cooking. Principle number 2, water efficiently. You know, we talk about approximately 60% of residential water bills attributed to irrigation systems. And that's important. And one of the biggest trends that we find in Alachua County and across the state, that a lot of our issues are just associated, our landscape problems are associated with poor irrigation practices and overwatering landscapes. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So irrigation is important. So there's an importance to irrigation. It helps fill the plant's needs when rain is, it says sufficient, which is not sufficient. If rain isn't giving us enough water, irrigation becomes a tool to make sure that the plants can stay healthy. It's a tool. It's not a tool that we need to use all the time, but it's a tool for us to use when rain isn't cutting it. But we're lucky because our prime rainy season is during our prime growing season. So most of the time, we don't actually have to run our irrigation systems at all. Setting it to our standard schedule, that's still not our best management practice, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. But irrigation is important because it can protect water quality if done correctly, because it makes sure that the plants, if you're making sure you're irrigating to provide enough water for plants to grow healthy when rain's not being sufficient, it can have a stronger plant material that can help absorb nutrients better, help reduce runoff, and then also vice versa. By not over irrigating your irrigation, you can help prevent that contamination. Water conservation, you know, depending on how you irrigate on those best management practices, you can have an incredibly healthy landscape, but have a very small footprint regarding to water use. It can help out with disease and pest management, as well as it can lead to significant economic savings. So I talked about this a little bit. I wanted the slide to be earlier in the presentation. It just didn't work. But this is what I was talking about, that Florida-friendly study that we did a couple years ago. On the image, both plots, you'll see that this was about a 2-year period. Both plots were, there's multiple samples, but each one was 2,450 square feet. So essentially it was, we took a 1/4 acre property and we took away the house and the driveway and all that hardscape, and whatever was left over, that's became the landscape that we managed. So each one was 2,450 square feet. For the traditional Florida landscapes, we just used rotor irrigation for the entire plot. But for the Florida-friendly landscapes, we used rotor in the turf areas. But then in the shrub beds, we used the combination of drip irrigation and shrublers. They weren't irrigating the same spaces. We just had separate locations for one of those. So you can see the total average in gallons between all the sites that were traditional Florida landscape plots. That was 172,089 gallons of water used. That's a lot of water. That is a lot of water. And based off of our GRU usage numbers, that comes out to be about 16 cents per square foot. And that's just the per gallons. That's for just the usage of the water. That doesn't include stormwater costs or anything like that. So looking at that number, I know I kind of mentioned it earlier, so I'm going to just go ahead and reveal this, but look at that savings that you see. That traditional Florida landscape is 172,000 gallons of water in that 2-year period, whereas that Florida-friendly landscape, total average consumption in gallons was 41,000 gallons for that 2 years. So you can see just that cistern alone is enough to be able to provide water for 2 years worth, over 2 years worth. But you can see that there's a huge benefit into using Florida-friendly landscaping, because not only are we are more than halving that total average consumption in gallons. And Mark just put a great document in an EDIS publication into the chat box that lists a bunch of different strategies that you can do in your irrigation, and kind of like the estimated water savings that you can get from doing those practices. So check that out, because it kind of breaks it out generally, the water savings as well as the money and economic savings. So the Florida-friendly landscapes obviously just way above the traditional Florida landscapes with regards to water usage. And one of the really neat things is, after this period, one of the things that we did is, we followed right plant, right place, and we had drought tolerant plants. The plants were thriving and healthy. So what we did is we just turned off the irrigation system completely. And we just wanted to see how the plants would do. And we would turn the irrigation system on if we noticed that the plants weren't doing well because they were just too dry and they just weren't happy. We never turned that system on for another 2 years. And by the time we turned it on, we realized there was a break in one of the lines, but because we never really did maintenance on it after that point, that we turned it off. But we went 2 years before we turned it on. We turned that system off. So we went through the study and then turned the system off, and those plants were happy and healthy and thriving. Now you could tell that if there was times where you kicked on the water just a little bit, they would have been fine. But they even survived a pretty droughty summer when they were out in the landscape without any water. So it's important to think about. But one of the things that we do have issues with is we overwater, and I always say it's because, and I mentioned earlier that most of the problems that we have in our landscapes are associated with overwatering, or I like to say we're overloving the landscape. Because what happens is, when we do things to our landscape, we're not doing it out of smite. We're doing it because we want our landscapes to be healthy. We see an issue in our landscape, one of the first reactions that we have is, oh, I'm going to irrigate. Oh, maybe I need to fertilize it more. But in actuality, that ends up making problems worse. And specifically with overwatering, it increases disease issues. It makes root rot and stunting, weak turf grass stands, and increased weeds. So what we want to see is, you want your turf grass or your plants, they're riding that edge of drought. Because what happens when they're riding those droughty conditions, they're creating strong, healthy roots. And they're growing their roots more so they can reach out for more nutrients, water and nutrients within the soil. And the minute we start irrigating them too much, those roots either die off from rot, or the plant is like, I don't need to try very hard, and it ends up just being very weak. Turf grass, one of the biggest things that we have this time of year is take all root rot. Take all root rot is spurred, from a lot of water, whether it be from rain, but primarily irrigation. So overwatering is a huge issue that we have within landscapes. So that's why we talk about, when do we actually irrigate? So we do have in Alachua County, and this is also part of Alachua County and St. Johns River Water Management District, is we do have irrigation restrictions on when you can irrigate. So it's always important to make sure that you are following your county's restrictions and guidelines regarding irrigation. But it's also important to make is like, yes, this is the standard that we have set. So if you're setting the timer on your irrigation system, you know, and you live in an odd number house and it's in the summer, Wednesday and or Saturday, you know, even number house set it for Thursday and or Sunday, and the winter is just once a week. But you know, that's a good standard to go by, but it's still not necessarily the best option. The better option is just turn your irrigation system off. Turn it off and only turn it on when your plants need it. And also make sure that you do irrigate during the times that you're allowed to, but your plants will be totally fine. If you just go ahead and jump it to once a week, your plants are going to be happy and healthy, especially because we're not in a drought this season. So, you know, you can follow your guidelines or just turn your system off and only irrigate when you know that it's times to irrigate. And we can tell that by just looking at some of the cues within our plants. So turf grass is one of the easy ones. Turf grass, what happens is if you look at it, it loses that green luster to it. It starts to get this like bluish gray color, and then the blades fold in half. And that's them essentially saying like, conserve my energy. Try not to lose as much water as possible, because through their transpiration, they don't want to lose oxygen. So they're like, ooh, try to hold on to it nice and tight. So they'll fold up to kind of keep themselves cooled down as much as possible. So that's a sign. Another good one is just as you walk around the landscape, actually in the turf grass, you can actually see your footprints stay because the grass isn't rebounding really quickly. That's a sign. But another good sign that you can use is just dig around a little bit and check the root zone. Is the root zone, which is going to be the top 6 to 8 inches of the soil, is it wet? Is it dry? And just kind of use that as a caliber. And if it feels really dry to you, then it's probably time to irrigate. But if it still feels wet, then you're probably good. In ornamental plants, you know, it's important to look at, you know, plants can be wilting. So you'll see a plant wilt when it has, when it's showing signs of drought conditions, but it can also wilt when it has too much water. So it's important to make sure that you differentiate between the two. But usually if you see the plant wilting, and if you can feel, if you go up to one of the leaves and see if you can crumble it a little bit, you can tell that it's dry versus just being overwatered. So just, that's a good check that you can do. So then how much? If you're irrigating, you want to apply a 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch when turf shows signs of wilt or your plant showed signs of wilt. And the reason we say the 1/2 to 3/4 inches is because that's where the root zone is of plant material. Most of our plant material, not including trees, but primarily turf, some of our small shrubs, but essentially 1 inch of water of applied water fills the top 12 inches of our soil. So that root zone is primarily going to be between that 6 and that 9 inches, 6 to 9 inches of soil. So if you irrigate more than 3/4 of an inch, all that water that's in excess is going way beyond the roots and nothing's going to pick it up. So that 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch, and we try to prefer that, we want you within that window, but if you can get it closer to that 3/4 inch, we call those deep irrigations, and that actually is going to encourage root development. So that amount, that does not vary, only the frequency varies, and that frequency is when and how often do you irrigate. Don't water past the point of runoff, because that means there's too much water in your landscape, and then that water is going to just carry any nutrients out into the roadway and lead towards contamination. And then finally, calibrate your irrigation system regularly. If you have a drip irrigation, this is not as important, but the pop-up rotors, any of those that you're using within your landscape, it's important to make sure that you have uniform coverage across that landscape. Because if you don't have uniform coverage, you're going to end up either irrigating too much in one area under irrigating in another area, and you might end up having patches of dead spots or excess of wet spaces. And calibrating your irrigation system can actually lead to overall water savings as well as economic savings that you see each year with improved plant health. And that document that Mark sent earlier in the chat box about water savings, those numbers are broken down in there. So as part of our irrigation systems, I was talking about the controllers. Just go ahead and turn off your irrigation system. And our controllers are really, really important to make sure that you properly set your irrigation controller, because properly setting your irrigation controller and setting it up appropriately can save thousands of gallons of water throughout a year. Because this is essentially, if you're using one of these, this is determining when your water can turn on and off. And it sets up the whole system for success or failure. But you want to change that schedule. We have those seasonal changes going back to the summer and winter days in which you can irrigate. But also think about that schedule might change because of plants. That establishment period, once you get beyond establishment period, you're going to back off your irrigation significantly. And also just making sure that you are turning that system off or changing that schedule if we're expecting a lot of rain in the future. But one way that we can help make sure that we're not irrigating when it's raining or when it's not needed, we have a couple ways that we can do that, and the technology is improving significantly for it as we go along. On the right image, what you're looking at, that's a rain sensor, and that is standard for all homes. If you have an irrigation system, you're going to have a rain sensor up on your along your roof line somewhere, and inside there's a little cork. It expands when it gets wet and it contracts when it gets dry. So if it's expanding beyond a certain point, it tells that controller that, hey, it's raining. So it turns off the controller and does not let the irrigation turn on. But one of the drawbacks of that is, how many of you, no, I don't want to ask this. I don't want to ask that question, but it's important to think to yourself, if you have one of these, have you ever replaced the cork in that rain sensor? And it's important that you do that regularly, because otherwise these do not work. Because of our temperature and our humidity and our weather, that expansion and contraction of the rain, that cork falls apart. And the minute that cork starts to fall apart, that rain sensor is no longer effective. So it's important to replace that cork inside of there, and you can buy that at any big box store, irrigation supply store, to do that replacement. So we found that even though people have rain sensors, sometimes they're just not effective because they haven't been maintained properly. The other ones that we really like to use, that this is one that we prefer a lot, or I prefer a lot, is the soil moisture sensors that you see on the image on the left. It's actually a sensor that you bury in the ground in usually the sunniest, hottest part of your landscape, where your landscape will dry out first. And it takes constant measurements of the soil moisture. And if that soil moisture gets below a certain point, it tells the controllers, like, okay, it's dry enough, you can irrigate the plants now. Or it'll say, oh, it's still wet, so there's no need for you to irrigate. So these things, the soil moisture sensors can keep your irrigation system off for a longer period compared to the rain sensor, because the rain sensors can dry out with a matter of hours. And then your irrigation system can kick on when it's not needed. The soil moisture sensor, you could get rainfall and it'll still read enough moisture in the soil for 4 or 5 days before there'd be any need to have your irrigation system kick on. So I like soil moisture sensors. The one drawback is, if you don't remember where you put it, it's hard to find. So let's go ahead and we'll jump into the last principle. So the last principle is mulch. Mulch, I love talking about this because a lot of times people just look at me like, Taylor, why are we talking about mulch? Doesn't make any sense. But mulch has a huge impact, especially when we're talking about water conservation and water use in the landscape. Because mulch has the ability to protect and enhance our soil, makes it stronger. Especially if you have a home built on arch or fill, just clean, void, nothingless sand, then mulch is a great way to help build that soil, which can make a stronger, healthier landscape. But anyways, what is mulch? Mulch is any material that is applied to the soil surface to protect or improve that covered area. So, I mean, we all use mulch. What kind of mulch do you have in your landscape, or what kind of mulch are you currently using? Straw and veggies. Yeah, pine straw, large pine bark. Teresa, I'll get to your question in a second. Pine bark leaves, tree chippings. Wonderful. Y'all are so good. Y'all are so good. So, all right, yeah. So pine needles, crushed oak leaves. There's the GRU freebies. Yeah, you can sometimes get that for that free mulch. Melaleuca, really good. Pine straw. So one of the questions that popped in are, what are my feelings about pine straw? Concerning pine straw as a mulch. Pine straw is an amazing natural mulch source. Especially if you're collecting it from trees around your area. There is some concerns that people, depending on where the source of the mulch, that pine straw is coming from, that there are some pine stands or forest managers that use a lot of nitrogen to just promote needle growth. So they can then bale it up for pine straw. That is a concern, but that's not a huge issue that we're dealing with. So pine straw is, especially if you're getting it from really the free source of the pine trees around your neighborhood. But it's important to think about when we're selecting mulch, what is that source? Can we understand what that source is from? That's a really good question. So let's talk about the benefits of mulch. So it protects plants from mechanical damage. So if you have a good mulch ring around a tree, you know, you're not going to have someone with a string trimmer come by and hit the branch or the trunk with the string and end up causing damage to the trunk. So it can help protect plants from mechanical damage, lawnmowers, a landscape crewman that's driving his car or vehicle through your property, whatever it might be. It makes maintenance a heck of a lot easier depending. It prevents water loss. It helps with temperature control as well as aesthetics. So it helps with water loss because what it's doing is just helping keep those temperatures down with the soil. So you're not getting evaporation as quickly. And that allows just that water to get used more effectively. So when you select mulch, here's some of the things that I recommend. Think about aesthetics, of course. Think about the longevity and durability. How long will that mulch last within the landscape? Some break down very quickly. Some might last for a little bit longer. We prefer the types of natural mulches, which we'll talk about here in a second, like the pine straw and pine bark, eucalyptus, melaleuca. But also think about sources, availability, and price. So where's your mulch coming from? So I briefly mentioned like the pine straw. You know, there might be some forest managers that use excessive nitrogen to help promote needle growth. But, you know, the biggest thing is you look at the bag, is it a sustainable source? Cypress, cedar mulches do not use, because those aren't coming from sustainable sources. There's no sustainable source associated with that. Usually you're going to see a stamp on bags that usually say if it's from a sustainable initiative, the Forest Sustainable Initiative, I believe is what it's called. But it just means it's coming from sustainable forestry practices. So that's always a good stamp of approval that you see. But also availability and price. A nice thing here in Alachua County and throughout the state, the stuff that we have available, especially in bulk, is going to be the most sustainable, like our pine barks and pine straws. So decomposition rates, how fast will it break down to help build your soil? They can have an impact on soil chemistry. And some of it's going to have a susceptibility to termites. So it's important that as that wood decays, keep it away from the foundation of homes because you don't want that to be a way to bring in those termites, especially those subterranean termites that Floridians love so much. Just kidding. Those are horrible. But anyways, so let's talk about mulch types. So we have benefits of mulch, but there's different types of mulch that we have available to us. Pine bark, that's a common one. It works out well. A lot of our HOAs our HOAs are allowing that one pretty easily. Pine needles are wonderful. Eucalyptus and Melaleuca, those are great ones that we can use because typically what they're being harvested from invasive species. So it's giving us a reason to go in and cut down some of those invasive species that we have, and then we can use it for second life in a beneficial way. And also just promotes a market to help get rid of invasive species. But then also have your utility or yard waste. So utility, you can get free mulch here in Alachua County, but it might end up having some weird things mixed in. As all utility mulch, it might have seeds, weed seeds. You don't know what you're gonna get. So that could be the cost of it being free. You might end up getting something you don't want. Unintentional herbicide damage could be one thing because they don't screen for that stuff. They just pick up whatever people put on the side of the road, they chip it up, and then people come pick it up. So, but, you know, leaves, the leaves that just fall out of your trees, your compost that you create and make, that can be a great mulch. The grass clippings can be great to a certain extent. So one little trick that I like to talk about is because, you know, natural leaf litter, like pine needles or some of the leaves that just fall out of our trees, they're phenomenal mulch. But a lot of times in HOAs, you're not allowed to use that because you have to have like pine bark or pine needles, which requires you going out and buying mulch and getting someone to install it. So a trick is to think about the depth of mulch that we put in our landscapes. We want 2 to 3 inches of mulch. That's desirable mulch depth after settling. So if you want to skirt by where you can use your natural leaf litter that you have in your landscape, make that about 2 inches deep, and then just top dress that thin layer, that last inch, with the mulch that you're supposed to use within the HOA, and you're covering the cheap, you're getting great compost or mulch for free, but then you're also adhering to your HOA guidelines at a much cheaper cost. So you can use combination of mulches, but if you're ever looking for high aesthetic, you know, you can always just use a natural mulch, and then you just come back with a thin layer to gussy it up a little bit, make it look nicer. But 2 to 3 inches, that is going to be your mulch depth. Too deep, it's going to hold too much moisture, and it's going to end up causing rot within the plants. Too shallow, you're not going to get the benefits because mulch has a great way to suppress weeds in that landscape. And if that mulch isn't deep enough, it won't suppress weeds, and you're going to have weeds start popping up. So good mulch depth conserves water, helps maintain soil temperature, and it can keep weed growth down. It's also very important to keep mulch 1 to 2 inches away from the base of shrubs. One of my landscaping pet peeves is volcano mulching. Volcano mulching, you can actually see in this picture on the left, is where we pile mulch up around the base of a tree. I don't know how it started, but it looks like a little volcano. And it is horrible for a tree. It holds moisture against the trunk. It causes the trunk to split and break, and fungus can get in there and essentially lead to tree mortality, which is horrible. And a lot of times you'll just see it right at the bottom of the tree. You need you need mulch for a tree to be spread out the drip line of the canopy. That drip line, that width of the tree straight down where that canopy is, everything underneath it, that's what you want to have mulch to help protect the roots, help protect the trunk. And what we don't do is we don't pile mulch up against the trunk. You need that root flare. So where the roots start to come out, we need that root flare to be exposed. And you have just a thin layer of mulch on top of the root ball, and that's just for aesthetics for trees. And we put like a little ring around the drip line of the tree so it can hold moisture. So I like to say trees, I think everyone can agree with this, just like trees, they don't prefer volcanoes, but they prefer donuts. Because when you do the mulch around the tree properly, it looks more like a donut versus a volcano. So that's important because that's helping protect our trees by using mulch appropriately, so then you can get the benefits of having trees within the landscape, especially with regards to absorbing moisture and excess of water, and as well as just helping protect our environment, as well as giving those benefits, the property values, etc. So we talked about these 4 principles. It was a whirlwind, I know, but you all had some great content coming into the chat boxes. But we can talk about, we have these 9 principles, and these 9 principles are the right plant, right place, water efficiently, fertilize appropriately, mulch, attract wildlife, manage yard pests, recycle, reduce stormwater runoff, and protect waterfront. We mentioned that all principles, or everything starts with right plant, right place. When we follow the principle of right plant, right place, all the other principles start to fall in line pretty easily. But it's important to think about how water plays a significant role within our landscape, not only of how we're using it effectively, but how we can also use it to our advantage. So I want to thank you, everybody, for joining us today. So we went through these questions again. What is the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program? You should be able to answer these hopefully by now. What is the FFL program? Why is water important in my landscape? And how can I use water better in my landscape? So feel free at any time to reach out to me. Reach out to our master gardeners. Our master gardeners are an amazing resource that if you have just any general landscape questions, you can send them those questions. They'll follow up with different resources to help solve any problems that you have in your landscape and just help you move forward to make some best management decisions.